Today's topic is around how new regional trends can impact your business. And what my goal is today is to touch on a number of facets that are currently impacting our ecosystem here in the Berkshires, and then sort of break off into some of the opportunities that these may provide for both new and existing businesses that are right here in our own backyard. It'd be great if I. There we go. So just a quick note. Again, my name is Ben Lamb. I'm the Director of Economic Development here at One Berkshire. And we work with businesses at all scales and at all points in their trajectory to really help them maximize their opportunities, their growth, their sustainability, and even their transfer as they go forward here in our regional economic ecosystem. And just a fact that I want to drop out there is, the reality is that your business is driven by controllable and uncontrollable factors. And if you are in business, you know this firsthand. I always joke that owning a business is basically getting a degree in business. And so you really are learning on the go. And if this isn't something that you noted before you started, I'm sure it's one that you identified after you started. There are always going to be things that come out of left field and will shift and dictate how you can operate and how you can function and sustain. But then there's also components that you yourself have the ability to control. And so my goal today is to showcase or at least discuss some of those uncontrollable factors and some of the things that really have impacted the broader systems here in the Berkshires, but then talk a little bit about the things that you have within your own bailiwick, within your ability to control, so that you can actually implement those facets and hopefully have some takeaways so that you're able to implement new actions and processes into your business or into the businesses of those that you're helping to support to help them become stronger over the long term. So just a quick, many of us here are already aware of sort of what the historic trends were in the Berkshires, but just to give you a quick few bullets here, some of the big highlights that I feel are important to at least acknowledge before diving into more of the pandemic impacted components and trends that we're seeing. So first off, here at One Berkshire, we have facilitated the Berkshire Blueprint 2.0. And this is our economic imperative for the next 10 years, which we publicly launched back in 2019. And the document is really meant to be a living process and document that brings together a broad swath of regional stakeholders to continue to keep the conversation going on what exists, what's happening, what's going great, what needs to be addressed, and then also what emerges over time so that we're not letting things fall to the wayside as we go through this process of the next 10 years. But as it goes, pre-2020, when we did launch the Berkshire Blueprint 2.0, there were massive positive trends that we were seeing across our economic landscape. A very significant investment. We calculated right around $3 billion over the last 5 years had been invested into the Berkshire infrastructure and economy, which is massive when you think about the population here being only around 128,000 people. So the per capita investment is very high here in the Berkshires, and that's an important metric to keep in mind. Additionally, we saw many of our economic clusters, which we'll get to in a little bit here, really seeing a surge in a way, and a sustained surge for many of them. When we look at sort of the metrics that we were trying to keep track of and the new metrics that we're looking at identifying with stakeholders and partners now, we were on a good trajectory pre-2020. So that's just an important thing to keep in mind, is that there was a curve that we were following and a curve that we look at getting back to. One thing that was a challenge, however, and this is one that is continuing to be persistent for a wide variety of reasons, is we have a persistent issue in our workforce numbers and skill alignment. And so, a lot of times you hear folks talk about creating more jobs, and creating more jobs is excellent as long as there's the workforce to backfilling those positions. And one challenge that we've run into, which has been a fairly contemporary issue that we've found, probably within like the last 10 years, is that historically, if you go far enough back, there were too many people and not enough jobs. And then that has evolved to so many jobs and not enough people with the right skill set to actually fill those. And so this has led to a lot of work with our partners at Mass Hire Workforce Board, as well as other stakeholder groups across the region, trying to address this pre-pandemic. So this is even before we got to 2020. And trying to create new training programs through our technical schools and through adult learning opportunities, and really trying to create a shift in how we are preparing folks for the jobs of today so that they're able to be active participants in our workforce. But that was an issue before the pandemic and continues to be so. So I just wanted to note that as a trend. And then the third piece that I think is important, and several of the folks that I see here on the webinar are well aware of this, is that there's a culture of startups and entrepreneurship that has really become very robust in, especially in the last 5 years. And that's not to say that startups were not robust prior to that, because they absolutely were. But within the last 5 years, that has been a significant trend that we've seen, especially on our end, as we are doing one-on-one consultations with businesses on the regular and seeing 200, 250 consultations coming through a year, many of those being folks that are trying to start new businesses who we then refer out accordingly. So that entrepreneurial landscape, that ecosystem has really evolved and matured in many ways in the last 5 years. And that's an important trend that is actually going to be incredibly important as we look at post-pandemic recovery, resiliency, and that rebound that we're hoping to see as a full region. So then the COVID-19 occurred, right? So, these are going to be some duh comments that you're going to be like, well, yeah, obviously, but ultimately, I think that it's important to at least acknowledge them before we get into a bigger conversation here. It was earth-shattering. The pandemic, I would dare say, on all accounts, was earth-shattering in one way, shape, or form, and that could have been personal, that could have been business, that could have been economically. But no matter what, this was something that really did shatter and shake the very ground that we were on in terms of our regional landscape, especially as we're looking at it as one Berkshire, in a wide variety of ways. Some of those ways have provided new opportunities. Some of those ways have certainly been very challenging, but it's just an important note to make. A business disruption. You can look at this in two ways. Business disruption can be a negative if there's a challenge with addressing it and being agile and pivoting accordingly. It can also be an opportunity if you are able to pivot and adjust and move accordingly, because you're going to be ready for a new era of business as it comes before you. So certainly a lot of business disruption, and that includes everything from supply chains to workforce to just not being able to get access to your customers, obviously. But that's another big piece to this puzzle. Mind changing. We saw this very quickly, especially with the move to virtual experiences and virtual work and virtual school. We really did have, if you go back a couple of years, there was a lot of resistance to this idea of working remote and resistance to this idea of being able to engage customers in as much of a quality way as you do in person online. The pandemic has really changed the minds of many and shifted the hearts of many as well towards thinking that these are actually opportunities for growth. These are not necessarily, big scary things or impediments to my ability to be viable, but they are actually opportunities that could have a persistent value going ahead, even past pandemic. Industry evolving. We've seen this in pretty much every economic cluster that we tend to focus on, and we'll talk about those clusters in one of the other segments this afternoon. But it really has shifted entire industry clusters, let alone individual operations that, in some cases have entirely changed their business model, in some cases have just evolved their product and their the way that they operate. But it has been very much so an industry evolving affair. And opportunity creating. And I put this at the bookend from earth shattering because I think that it's important to recognize that when things shatter, there tends to be openings and opportunities that are created within there. And so we have certainly seen some really tragic occurrences over the course of the last year and a half now, approximately a year and a half. But the opportunities that have been created are also very significant. And we've seen a lot of folks take advantage of those in a positive way. And for us, that is a sign of what's to come. So the major points that I'm going to talk about over the course of the next hour-ish here, there's four big ones. I'm going to try to break them up as cleanly as possible so that I'm really focusing on each one independently. So the first one is we're going to talk about new markets. We're going to talk about new residents. We're going to talk about new industries. And then we're going to talk about new resources. When I'm talking about new markets, really things, we're going to talk a little bit about online sales, mail order customer bases, and just kind of the new demands and the new necessities that come along with that. In terms of new residents, we've seen a huge influx in new residents, and it's no surprise to many, but it is a reality that we should all be very cognizant of, no matter what industry that we're focused in. And so that's another piece to this. New industries, we're going to talk about kind of the 5 clusters that we have been focusing on with the Berkshire Blueprint 2.0 for the last several years, but also address one that really has come out of the woodwork as a major, and I would dare say, primary cluster here now is the outdoor recreation economy, which is booming in many ways, shapes, and forms. And then finally touch on just a variety of those new resources. It's not going to be comprehensive. It's impossibly comprehensive in a short presentation, but just to give kind of a sense on where things are going and how they've evolved, and hopefully direct you to where you might be able to find the resources that you need for yourself going ahead. So new markets, to give you kind of the high level 30,000 foot view, what I'm talking about here, we've seen engagement of a number of new markets in the Berkshires through the pandemic. So this includes those living here who still needed access to supplies, resources, they needed to purchase things, they needed to eat food, they still needed a social outlet in some way, shape, or form throughout the pandemic itself. We have those who are receiving new supports. So, you know, certain programs actually have helped to amplify access to local goods. And so we'll talk about that as we go along here. Those who have moved here, I mean, that's a whole new category, and it sort of hits on the new resident piece, but there's been a new influx of customer bases and new markets that you can tap into based on those who are here now. Those who have visited long-term, so even if they haven't moved here permanently, we've seen a lot of multi-month residents who have come here for longer than a week, longer than a few days, but actually made this sort of an escape location for them from major urban centers. Those who have just discovered us, this is a very exciting crowd, right? These are the folks that there's a novelness and a newness to their experience here in the Berkshires, and they're pumped. They want to jump head first, and they really want to be engaged and take advantage of this thing that they've now found, which we've all known about for a long time, but we're welcoming them into the fold. And then those who are seeking that authentic item or experience. The Berkshires has a brand identity that it carries with it, and it has for well over 100 years now. And that brand has multiple layers to it and different identities that it comes with. But folks are seeking out those authentic pieces, whether it's farm to table or it's the cultural amenities or it's the outdoor recreation, natural resources, all of those things. They all are part of something that these new markets are seeking. When we talk about new residents, we're going to dig into really a few primary categories. So those second homes that have been made permanent. So folks that have owned here, but have not necessarily lived here. They came more from a visitor base, but now they're looking at this as a more permanent abode. New home sales, which we'll talk about some actual numbers year over year when we get to that segment. The new home sales has been immense. And I think you might be even a little bit surprised at how immense it's been. And then new economy participants. So these are not necessarily folks that are, they're not just new residents. They're also part of our workforce. They're part of our tax base if they're bringing a small business with them, things along those types. So they're actually even bigger than themselves. They are part of our new economy. When we talk about new industries, obviously the pandemic provided a lot of challenges, but there were several impacts on industries across the region that have a positive light on them. So, we talked about kind of the opportunities that have opened, so gaps that have opened, and new or existing gaps that have become more prevalent, have emerged as a higher level, more important topic to tackle. New demand increases for particular goods, services, whatever the product might be. There are certain demands that have increased both on a local and on a national, international scale. And then the new emergence of specific industry clusters that have, may have been here, but might not have seen as much demand as they saw through the pandemic and are likely to see post-pandemic. And then finally, when we get into the new resources, really looking at what the reallocation of existing resource pools looks like and the creation of new assets to tap into. And these are things that are really completely reshaping our entrepreneurial and economic environment. So these are not just resources for new businesses. They're not just resources for existing businesses. They cover the spectrum. And I think that that's been an important evolution, especially the rapid evolution over the course of this year, in terms of how our resources are being allocated very strategically through many new and existing partners and stakeholders, to make sure that the rising tides raises all ships mentality can actually be achieved.